you could be particularly valuable in leadership and being able to drive change and showing leadership. But you will need to have some sort of superpower across this, right? Which will help you propel forward. At the end of the day, people will be willing to give you more opportunities. You will be able to get more opportunities if you have one of these superpowers which you're able to use in the right kind of job for you. So the thing I want to tell people is it's impossible to find a superpower when you're the first or second year in college. But something to keep in mind, and as you grow, try to figure out your superpower and try to build upon it. Sometimes the returns are not immediate. Sometimes it'll take, the value of it will come in years.
Hello, Roy, and welcome to the Mitti Ke Rang podcast. I am elated to have you as a guest.
Hi, Mishika. Nice to be here.
Hi, how are you doing? How has your day been?
I'm doing good. It's very turbulent and uncertain times, but we're trying to survive in this. What about you?
Absolutely. Same. I've been logged in my home for the past 5 or 6 months now, and just taking one day at a time and going with it, going with the flow, keeping myself busy. So that's the key for me.
Yeah, I think right now in these times, what's important is to have resilience and have the mental strength and support others around you with this strength is needed.
Absolutely, you're very right.
Yeah.
So, about today's podcast, I want to talk to you about the industry, about e commerce, and about your
Mm.
personal life. So, I would like to start the podcast um, with diving a bit into the nostalgic feel and talking with you about your college life and your
Yeah.
ambitions back then.
Yeah. Okay. So after school, uh, I decided to do engineering. I think at that point of time, one of the key drivers was I did not want to study or work too hard. And engineering seemed to be the easy way out. I started doing engineering, but in a year or two, I kind of made up my mind that I wanted to get into business at the end of the day. So, starting from somewhere my second to third year of engineering, I started preparing for the MBA exams. Uh, During engineering, I was quite active. I did a lot of extracurricular activities, quizzes, Rotaract, and just kind of tried to keep myself busy and get a lot of exposure in things happening outside the study domain. Uh, I did sit for placements, but mainly it was like, okay, it's a tick box. You get something, so there remains a backup. I sat for one of the first companies which came on campus, which is kind of in the software services, got through and kind of ticked that box off. And then I think it was mainly studying and prepping for my MBA exams. And that's what I kind of spent a lot of my third year, fourth year doing.
Okay, so for you, it was the other ways. Like you said, you didn't want to study a lot, so you got into engineering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a,
So
yeah, go
So
ahead.
it's actually the opposite for a lot of people I talk to.
Mm,
They say they don't want to spend their 4 years studying a lot, so they get into other things.
mm. Yeah, I mean, the thing about engineering is it's a lot of practical application. So what I realize is that if you understand the practical applications, you can get away with it. And unlike a field like medicine or law, where you really need to study for the rest of your lives just to keep updated, engineering you can get. I thought at that point of time you could get away with it, but then as I'm growing older, I'm realizing, hey, you still need to stay current on what's happening in the world. So it's study in a different sense.
Right. So how did you switch from engineering to then pursuing your MBA?
I think uh, at that point of time, I decided to do it as a fresher. Maybe that's not the best decision because I also now realize that if I did my MBA with a bit more work experience under my belt, I'd be able to appreciate a lot of things even more deeply. But what's past is past. So what I did was I just started preparing for my MBA exams. And on the third and fourth year, join the MBA coaching class, and that's what kind of I did.
Okay. So I see you have a great portfolio. So something that I want to really ask you is what drives you every morning?
I think to me, what drives me is that uh, 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 I look forward to solving interesting problems and tough problems, and at the end of the day, I am able to get time out to spend pursuing my hobbies, spending time with my family. So that's what drives me. To be frank, I look at every day and say, okay, what's what I need to do at work, and then once I stop that, I'm like, okay, how do I make most of my time with my family?
Right. So it both ways for you.
Yeah.
So what are your hobbies in particular, like you were talking about it?
So I like reading. I tend to read a lot, and uh, uh, kind of uh, uh, right now it's summer and nice, so I also tend to go out with my child to parks, just spend time with her.
Lovely. So now just hopping into a bit of
Mm,
professional and industry specific outline of the podcast.
mm,
So my question to you would be, like, as you hopped into working for
mm,
some of the greatest and the biggest
mm,
companies,
mm.
so how did you see your growth and what does growth particularly means to you?
Mm. I think to me, it's always an adventure, saying that uh, wherever I move in the career, I need to be learning something new. I need to be doing new stuff, uh, which challenges me to a sense, which also makes me move out of my comfort zone. But in the end, it makes me learn. So a lot of my career moves have been based on challenges which have been put in front of me, which have been very vague, uncomfortable. But I think that's how I've thought about it, saying that every role I do needs to make me grow. And when I say grow, it means it needs to give me skills I didn't have. It needs to give me exposure to things I did not have. So at the end of the day, I can become a more holistic person.
Right. So it's a evolving process and you grow every
Mm.
day by
Yeah,
doing something new and experimenting basically.
yeah, yeah. You can never be a perfect person, right? And there is so much things, skills which you cannot pick up. But there are also some things you can learn and you can do in the limited time. So to me, it's always about what can I learn new? What can I do new?
Absolutely. So talking about the lockdown specifically, how do you think it has helped you and what are the things you've learned during the lockdown? Some self-realization or introspection that you might have done?
I think the big thing I've realized about lockdown is how it has blurred the boundaries between work and personal life. Uh, for a long time, I think what we were doing it was very unsustainable. The amount of time spent in work versus time spent in personal time, and the boundaries became very blurred. So recently, I've started to be more intentional in how I draw the boundaries, and then being able to spend time with my family, with myself. I think that's one thing which the lockdown has taught us. I think the other stark thing which lockdown has taught me is that mm, if I walk around the high streets, you can really see businesses struggling. You can really see people struggling. And mm, mm, and during this time, I thought, okay, I should try and help people as much as I can. So I started mentoring people, offering some people advice, and that's also been a bit fulfilling. And because I've been able to help somebody. But yeah, I think the world is not in a great place right now, and we don't know how long this is ahead. So, mm, and that's a stark realization which has happened.
Absolutely. I think it's a very unique situation for all of us, and we've never been in something like
Mm,
this. We all are learning
mm,
how to adapt every day with every new challenge.
yeah. And I think it's very unprecedented. So today there's no playbook of how to do it, right? Today nobody there's a whole bunch of advice, but then everybody's situation is unique. Everybody has to think about their own circumstances, their own context, and how what are the things they need to manage. Some people have challenges with the family. Some people have challenges with work. Some people, for example, here in England, uh, uh, students have graduated without even giving the exam. So people have challenges in a lot of places. I think what's important here is everybody staying calm and focused and trying to build the mental resilience and muscle to be able to survive this.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. I see a lot of people struggling. Even it can be difficult staying at home, struggling with anxiety and all the issues you have around. And specifically the news, it can be very distressing at times.
Yeah,
So I think that
yeah,
is
I
where
think
we need to take a step back and keep calm.
yeah, and I think one of the most important things everybody can do is when you're talking to somebody over video, over call, genuinely ask, "How are you doing?"
Right.
Not as a courtesy, but just to find out how the person is doing, whether they're doing well, whether they're struggling. And I think that makes a lot of difference.
Absolutely. Check on your loved ones, how are they doing?
Mm,
That is the key, right?
mm,
So now talking about e-commerce, which you've been in
mm,
for
mm,
a quite number of years.
mm,
So
mm.
how do you think the definition of e-commerce has changed over the years, and how do you see it evolving?
So if I kind of disagree with you there, Mishika. I don't think the definition of e-commerce has changed. The concept was always that there is commerce, and that commerce happen through online web or some other digital presence. And uh, if you look at some of the business models which might look as new, a lot of them have been happening, whether offline, whether online. It's just that it's now formalized, and a lot of different business models and industries are now doing it online.
So especially in the lockdown, e-commerce and the online businesses have been like a life-saving thing for almost all of us.
Yeah.
So, how do you think, specifically in the lockdown period, the consumer outlook has changed towards these online businesses and the e-commerce industry?
I mean, I can talk about my limited observations and what I've read. I think uh, in this lockdown has accelerated some of the trends which were already happening, especially trends around buying grocery or other low involvement habit based items online. I think that habit has just accelerated. I think this has also kind of made people more experimental in trying out things like buying clothes, buying shoes online, which a lot of people were very hesitant about. So, in that sense, consumers have taken on a greater risk appetite. It just, I don't think it's changed. This change was always coming and this change was happening. It's just speeded it up.
Absolutely. And I think on a consumer outlook, like you said, for example, the things I couldn't imagine buying online or getting online, I would always prefer going out and getting them myself. I've now started to order them online and get them online, try out new businesses. Let's try this out. How's this? And
Mm,
right, the risk appetite, like you were talking about.
yeah. I think it's also important to note that on the other hand, the supply side, it is not all that rosy. A lot of suppliers are small and they depend upon regular cash flows. So some of the big ones have been able to survive. Some of the small ones are still struggling because they don't have the liquid cash to keep their workers on board, to ensure that goods and services are being generated. So at the end of all of this, we'll have to take a stock check of what really happened. Because today it's still the picture is emerging, and as as time goes on, we'll realize what the stable state looks like.
Absolutely. So there's this two sides of a coin which we often talk about. So do you think with the growth of e-commerce industry, the small businesses or the retail houses might die if they don't adapt with the technology?
I think, like, if we look back at the past, right, there have been things which have caused disruptions in society. 100, 200 years ago, the narrative was all around steam and how steam power is going to change the world and industrialize. And at that point of time, um, um, uh, um, companies who did not adopt to the industrialized situation had struggle coming in. You go back in history, it was gunpowder, right? Countries who had gunpowder started moving faster, started getting bigger. So, and if you look at the current narrative which is emerging today, people talk about data and information. So, and it's all based on hindsight. Today we can talk about today's age being data and information, and ultimately businesses to survive need to adopt to that. Now, data and information does not necessarily mean you become an e-commerce business. It's just that there is so much data which is generated, right, from interactions. Some of it has been always in the retailers or service providers' mind. You will know the service providers you use. They will know you. They understand you, right? Now, what's really important is how are they able to use this data they have? And this is not generated data, this is not digital data, but this is data. How are they able to use this data to better offer services? There are people who are doing that. If you see, a lot of small businesses are using WhatsApp and trying to engage with customers. Uh, their service delivery model or product delivery model has not changed. What just has changed is their awareness of their customers and how to reach out to them. And that has enabled them to thrive. So as the world moves, right, and it's important for businesses that they're able to use the data to take the right decisions and to help the right customers. I think businesses who are not able to adapt to this database paradigm are the ones who'll suffer. It may or may not be e-commerce which will make or ruin them, but it'll just be the ability to use information for decision making.
Absolutely. I think you summed it up very well. It's not e-commerce what will kill their growth.
Mm.
So how post lockdown era, how do you view the whole e-commerce scenario?
I think, like I said, the trends have accelerated, right? Now, as the trends have accelerated, you have more and more new people coming into the market from the customer perspective. There's more appetite to try out new things, right? So, which means that there's also an opportunity for a lot more businesses to be able to come online and open that as a new channel. Now, as the new channels open up, customers will be demanding new experiences. For example, you're buying a shoe. There is an experience which is attached along with buying a shoe, looking at designs, trying out how it looks like, right? And a lot of these experiences today are not very mature online. There's bits and pieces which are happening. As more and more customers come in, it also creates a pressure on all the businesses to have better and better experiences around this. So over time, I expect to see a lot of the boundaries blurring between e-commerce in the past and physical retail in the past, where a lot of these experiences or a version of them start coming online.
Right. So, what I can deduce from the conversation in
Mm,
layman terms, so and
mm,
you can correct me if I'm wrong.
mm.
So there's a lot of opportunities if the businesses move online, but the ones who won't adapt to the technology are the ones which will suffer in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a historical inevitability, right? Uh, it- it- at every point in time, there comes revolutions, right? For example, in the 80s, 90s came the computer revolution. Uh, businesses adopt to it. Some businesses adapted to it naturally. Some were forced to adopt to it, and you will never have 100%. There will be some still holdout businesses that who will not adopt to it and still be able to create a thriving business, but they're always going to be a very small handful and a minority. So in this world, uh, if you uh, if you ask me that, hey, do you need to adopt to technology, do you need to adopt to data and using information, the answer is, if you don't adopt, there's a high probability you won't survive.
Right.
It's not that you need to necessarily adopt, but mm, uh, 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 unless you need to be agile and you need to ensure that you're doing the right things for your customers and for your business.
Right. So, along with this coronavirus and the whole pandemic thing, we've also seen a technological revolution and how things are moving online, not just businesses, also how education of fintech and edtech, everything has moved online.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's been really interesting. If you ask me what my take of how will the world change, I think what will what I believe will happen is a lot of companies will realize that remote working is productive, remote working is possible. uh, so far a lot of emphasis was given on people to people relationships and face to face interactions, and they are obviously important. You cannot really run an effective team or have effective collaboration without knowing who your co-workers are and without meeting them at least sometime. But uh, uh, but then I think the operative term becomes sometime, because a lot of times you can still operate, right, in a flexible manner, at least for some of the job functions. And in that time, I think some of the things which change for people is the commute time changes, right? Uh, As people are adjusting to remote work, the other thing I've seen is that uh, flexibilities and timings have gone up because of the extraordinary situation. People have different working hours, and even in the same team. And companies have, and businesses have been very flexible about it. What that has meant is a lot of businesses are slowly thinking that flexibility is actually a good thing and ends up having productivity benefits than harms. So typically there was a dominant narrative that face-to-face interactions are really needed to be productive. I think this situation has challenged that. And mm, uh, uh, it has created a lot of natural experiments which have had outcomes. Now businesses can look at it and then decide how the future looks like.
Absolutely. I think I agree. And how remote work has become the future, and how
Mm,
people will now prefer to stay at home. And like you said, the boundary between the personal life and the work life has been blurred.
yeah. I think as a maybe there are two things here, right? One is we realize remote work is going to happen, right? So what that also means is it perhaps will enable a larger proportion of the workforce to come into work. People who had challenges traveling, people who had constraints in places they could sit and work from. In the near future, you can expect a lot of that to go away. So suddenly you have a lot of people coming into the workforce. Same thing with a situation like education. Uh, if it's a really good educational thing, uh, location is not going to be a constraint for somebody to get that. Now, obviously, this style of work, this style of education will not work for everybody. So that's the flip side of the coin. It it makes it sort of impersonal because there's no physical contact. And over time, I think we'll also need to figure out how to ensure nobody's left behind as this revolution and this change is happening. How do we ensure everybody who's part of this has their chance and has their say?
Right. So as we talk about the advantages and the positive side of everything moving online, so what do
Hmm.
you think is the disadvantages or probably the negative sides that we are ignoring, especially in developing countries where not everyone has the access of moving online or the luxury of sitting at home and working on a laptop?
I think if I look at the flip sides, there is one, a loss of human contact, right? We are a society, and over time, human societies have been formed based on the concept of physical proximity, physical contact, and emotional bonding. Uh, A lot of our communication today, if you see, are based uh, on non-verbal cues, seeing somebody's body language, seeing somebody's facial expressions, and trying to adapt to that. a small screen, a remote screen, is not conducive to that. So there is going to be definitely a lot of unlearning and learning of how we communicate through these new mediums. I think that's going to happen, and a lot of people will find that challenging, and that's going to be one of the disadvantages of that. Unless we are able to help them out, unless we're able to include them, it's going to be more and more difficult for them, and you end up creating a sense of alienation. And uh, mm, it has always happened in history that if you try something hard and there are people who are not able to adopt, be it religion, right, be it a particular technology, be it a particular culture, or they will take a different stance. They sometimes can get violent. For example, the Luddite revolution, which tried to break machinery, right? And it creates a very adverse reaction. So while we talk about all of this moving online, it's very important to understand the diversity we're dealing with and try to be inclusive in that movement. I think to me, these are the key points.
Absolutely, very well summed up. So now I would just hop back onto your experience working with Amazon, Bharti, Walmart, and again the biggest companies. So how did you finally land to Facebook, and how has the culture at Facebook been?
I think it's been kind of a step-by-step transition. I started working in retail operations, slowly moved into consulting. From consulting, I moved into product management and then moved from product management from one company to the other. Every company has its own culture, and there are pieces of culture which are great. There are pieces of culture which are not so great, which you don't like. I think in large companies have also pockets of culture because they're large and there are individual units. Every unit operates in a certain way. I think the, to sum of the culture of a company is going to be hard. You can only sum up the culture of the unit, and which is very dependent on the people who are working on the unit and what state the unit has been. So that way, I think this is a difficult question. I think some of the things which do echo around is, uh, at least my last role here, is one, it's a collaborative company, and uh, uh, everybody's in it together trying to solve problems and trying to make things better. I think that's one great thing about it. Two is it's a company which is young and there's a lot of debate. And I think what's great is there's acknowledgement that a lot of debates don't have a clear right or wrong answer.
Right. So talking about the purpose. So in terms of professional life, how would you describe your purpose?
I think, to be frank, I don't have a purpose. As I said, I move from adventure to adventure, and it's about what am I learning, and uh, is that making me a better person? Now, learning could be based on skills. Learning could be based on, for example, learning to code is a skill. You could also have learning based on competencies. For example, are you able to problem solve? Are you able to communicate? You can also have learnings based on the leadership. How are you able to navigate change? How are you able to get people aligned to a certain vision? So, I, as long as I'm getting learnings across these dimensions, it's always a great thing for me.
Right. So I have these two questions which I ask every guest as I wrap up the podcast. So
Yeah.
one of which would be, what is the best piece of advice you've ever got, which you would like to share by summing up into a 5 to 7 word presentation title?
Mm. So, so I think in, the thing which has stuck to me is that, mm, at, yeah, try to try to enjoy what you do, and mm, uh, I remember a quote from somewhere a long time ago, which spoke about the fact that, uh, 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 at, and this I think came from golf, where somebody said, "You don't start playing golf the moment you walk into and start playing golf. You enjoy your walk, you enjoy the sunshine, feel the grass, smell the grass, and then you start to play." I think that's very important, that you enjoy what you're trying to do, right? And then be laser focused on that. So
Right.
always try to enjoy what you're doing. If you're really not enjoying what you're doing, it's a very vicious cycle. You are unhappy. You make everybody around you unhappy. And I mean, I in my career have been in places like this, right? And there have been difficult times. It just keeps you down and depressed. So at the end of the day, this is what you want to try and avoid. And it's important, hence, to have the self realization is when you're really not enjoying, to understand why are you not enjoying that and what can you change to that. Sometimes it's just a role, sometimes it's a company, sometimes it's just you can change.
Right. So just introspection and self-realization about how things aren't going well for you, and then adapting and changing according to that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So, what is the message that you would like to share to all the listeners, and specifically the Generation Z who has the zeal to hop onto a new journey after college or after graduation?
Uh, I think what I learned over my time is that it's important to have one or two superpowers. And superpowers are hard skills that you are proud of, that make you valuable, right? Uh, mm, and today, a lot of people, and even when I started my journey, I did not know what those were. And you start with a generalized thing. But at the end of the day, you need to have some specialist skills, and it can be in multiple dimensions. One, you could be specialized about a particular industry. For example, media. That brings value. You could be very great at a particular skill. For example, like you're doing Mishika podcasting, right? And obviously there's going to be value people will find in that, and that will help you grow. Or you could be particularly valuable in leadership and being able to drive change and showing leadership. But you will need to have some sort of superpower across this, right? Which will help you propel forward. At the end of the day, people will be willing to give you more opportunities. You will be able to get more opportunities if you have one of these superpowers, which you're able to use in the right kind of job for you.
Right.
So the thing I want to tell people is it's impossible to find a superpower when you're the first or second year in college. But something to keep in mind, and as you grow, try to figure out your superpower and try to build upon it. Sometimes the returns are not immediate. Sometimes it'll take uh, the value of it will come in years. But but your career is not a 2 year thing. Most people will work for 20 to 30 years, maybe even more. So as long as you have a superpower which you know is going to be relevant, you will end up on tops at the end of the day.
Absolutely. So, on that note, I would like to thank you for being with us here today and sharing such great insights from the industry and from the perks and the negatives of moving online. And I'm sure this is a pretty insightful and valuable session for all the listeners.
Cool. Thank you, Mishika, for having me here.